Class heroes, this is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. The Civil War, the second Civil War. Yes, I'm told it's been postponed. I guess the 4th of July was a bad day for everyone. Couldn't decide on uniforms. I had proposed shirts or skins. You know, going old school. Not a suggestion well taken. We couldn't get the snacks in order, couldn't get all that stuff all taken care of. So postponed. No Civil War tomorrow. No. And, you know, it's been kind of a funny little back and forth because you've got these right-wing idiots who throw this stuff out there. And it's, you know, my grandfather always said there were people who used to talk out of their, there you know what's. And there he is. The guy talking out of his, the thing in the backside. And there's part of me that goes, they want this. There are people who have been fantasizing about this for a long time. And I remember the guy who used to live behind us. The only conversation I ever had with him was about the big blue X on his flagpole and the cannon that he had in his living room. Because he actually thought we were going to refight the Civil War. And not just refight it, but we're going to refight it exactly the way it was. And because this is when I first moved to where I'm at, it was a culture shock for me. This is, we're like 45 minutes from Gettysburg. We're about an hour from the Mason-Dixon line. So this was, this is Civil War history area. Didn't realize that when I moved here. And I had grew up in Cleveland where, the Civil War was something you learned about in the history class. It's something that you went to Washington, D.C., and you learned a little bit about, you pushed through, but, it wasn't really, part of who you are. Here, when I moved here, it was the first 5 people that I met. The guy who installed the cable box, the guy who, installed something else, the phone, everybody that I met were Civil War reenactors, except the guy behind me who was a Civil War enactor, which he gave me this dissertation about that they were going to change the ending. And I was just like, wow, going to change the ending, huh? And they truly believe that. And I found that there were a number of people in this area who, we're still fighting that battle, and they want that fight again. That whole, the South is going to rise again, which is another reason why I despise country music. Because it's that whole mentality of, the South's going to rise again and we're going to whip you Northerners and all of that. And what that ultimately means is it's not just about the battle and about the fight. It means going back to those days. It means, white supremacy and guys dancing around in sheets. And it means, people swinging from trees, especially if they have the wrong, skin tone. It means, forced labor. It means, all of those horrible things. It means a hierarchy based on anything but intellect. And that really, really scares me. And, the idea of having, this hierarchy, based on anything but intellect. I look at our president, who yesterday evidently decided that he wasn't going to lower the flags for the people killed at the Capitol Gazette. And, it was one of these things where I tweeted out, I go, who does this? Who makes this choice that there are worthy dead and unworthy dead in this kind of a scenario? When 5 people are executed for doing nothing more than their constitutionally protected job to inform we the people. And I put this out, and, it's one of these things that I didn't really think that there would be anyone, and I don't know the term. I mean, at this point, I mean, stupid, dumb, ignorant, those don't even fit. It's indefensible. So when, and again, I come back to this, it's absolutely, positively, without question, indefensible, but someone decided that it was defensible. And they responded to my tweet by saying that the newspaper used its position to attack a mentally ill man and drive him to the point of homicide. This is one of those things where you go, this is blame the victim. They did their job. They reported on a case that this guy was involved in where he was stalking somebody. And evidently, you listen to the lawyer in the case, was terrifying. And, now we know this guy had sent letters, and this guy was just, just a menace from top to bottom, and society did nothing to protect people from him. And this newspaper was reporting on it, that this guy did this. This is what the plea was. This was the story. And I would argue warning others of, hey, there's a problem here. But this guy has the audacity to say, no, Donald Trump's perfectly within his purview to do whatever he wants to do because, you know what, that newspaper, they made him do it. That newspaper, they're responsible. And honestly, I struggle. I mean, I struggle for even words to describe how angry and how ridiculous this entire scenario really is when you have someone attempting to defend that. It makes literally no sense. And what's angering and frustrating to me on a bunch of levels is that there are these trolls out there. And look, I get it. I get trolling. I get busting shoes. I get it. I get, hey, my side's going to win. I get, I'm defending the president. I kind of get that. But there's a point at where basic, decent, just humanity, where basic, just common decency is still who we are. And I fear we're losing that. When you're trolling to a point to where you're devoid of any humanity, there's a serious problem with that. And it gets me to this point to where if we're going to do this, and I guess, you look at all the policies of this administration, and it's not surprising where we are right now. It's not surprising that this dimwit decided that this is where he was going to stake his flag in the ground on the president not lowering the flags for these journalists, for these human beings, for these Americans, for these heroes, for these people who get up every day. And you ask any journalist, they've all had an idiot who has threatened them. They've all had somebody who didn't like what they wrote and has threatened them. In fact, we got a president who threatens journalists every single day. So if you can tolerate that, if you can put up with that, if you can go, that's okay. He's president, going to do what he's going to do. Then I guess it's okay to rip children away from their parents. And I've gotten tons of these responses from people, well, they shouldn't come here then, or they're breaking the law. I go, well, recite the law to me since you seem to know it there, Clarence Darrow. The thing is go back to the Reagan quote. I mean, Reagan, said it best. I despised Ronald Reagan. There's so much that they know that isn't so. There really is. And you get these jailhouse lawyers who they think they know it all. And they can justify the U.S. government. They can justify us in our name. And this is what this is. It's in our name. They can justify kidnapping. Because what we're doing is we're saying, okay, you want your kids back? You want your kids back? Then you leave the country and you don't come back. You don't seek asylum. You make your trek back, take your sorry binds, go. But if you want to try and stay here and fight for asylum, which is a right to do internationally, then we're going to take your kids. We're going to deport you. You don't get anything. And you can go, you can go fight whatever you want, but we're taking your kids from you. To me, that's kidnapping. That's extortion. That's so many things, and it's so much wrong. And it's all, in my view, it has nothing to do with, they care about immigration. They care about, it has nothing to do with, it's a political piece. It's going to enrage the dim. It's going to get the knuckle draggers, breathing through their mouths again and all hopped up. Going to get them all wadded up in the panties and angry. And you get to tick off those libtards. You see, I love those people who say, I wake up every morning and drink a healthy cup of libtard tears. That's where we are as a country. And I mean, it's really twisted on a whole bunch of levels. And, at the end of it, what I find amazing is that still on the right, you hear crickets. The party of family values, crickets. And I'm not sure if that's who they are. This is who they are. This is who they've always been. And I've never had a real high opinion of the folks on the right wing. But just to kind of throw this out there, it's who they're showing me they are. And it's scary stuff. And I reach across and I say, look, how do we make sure that people have true family values, that we keep families together? Because I've yet to find anyone, it doesn't matter the politics. It doesn't matter, what letter you put after your name or where your voter registration is. I've yet to find anyone who says if they were living in Honduras or Guatemala or El Salvador or Mexico or any of those places, that if their family was in danger and peril, their kids were being recruited into gangs, their wives and their daughters were being raped and abused and all of that stuff. I've yet to find anyone who would say, no, I'm going to stay. I'm going to stay and I'm going to take on the cabals or the gangs or the cartels. I'm going to take it on. I'm going to put my family through that. I've yet to find anybody. So when people are coming here seeking safety, security, protection, help, it's always been this country's goal, its mission, to reach out that helping hand. And yet what we're getting right now is as they're reaching out their hand, we're cutting off their arm. There's something wrong with that, which is why, again, November is so very important. And I think, this coming election, they keep saying, I've heard this my whole life. This election's the most important in history. This one is really, really very important. I would put it right up there with the most important ever, especially given the fact that we're going to appoint another Supreme Court justice who's going to be even crazier and even more to the extreme of Neil Gorsuch. And all of those things that people fought for in the 20th century, all going to be gone very quickly. So we're going to talk about that today. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Scott Dworkin's going to be here. We're going to talk to our friend John Callahan from ATU. When we come back, we're going to talk with Mallory Hagan. She's Miss America 2013, running for Congress. Looking forward to that conversation. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Own 90% of the wealth, 10% of the people. Own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people. Own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. That was the day Secretary of Labor Frances Perkins announced that sit-down strikes were unsuited to America and believed labor unions would abandon using the tactic altogether. Her declaration came in the form of an open letter to Republican Congressman William Ditter of Pennsylvania. In the wake of the Flint sit-down strike, he had insisted on clarification of her perspective towards sit-down sit-down strikes. 1937 had been rocked by a wave of sit-downs everywhere. Workers made huge gains using the tactic, especially during the historic GM strike in Flint, Michigan. During the strike, Secretary Perkins asserted that the legality of sit-downs had not yet been determined. In her open letter, Perkins noted that she accepted the opinion of the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. That court had just ruled that thousands of striking hosiery workers at Apex Hosiery in Philadelphia had acted unlawfully when they employed the tactic in their tumultuous strike weeks before. She added, quote, "It is not and never has been an official position of the Department of Labor or the Secretary that sit-down strikes are either lawful, desirable, or appropriate. In fact, the officers of the department and the Secretary have urged union leaders and members not to use the method and to bend every effort to take men out of a plant where used. It is also full of hazards to the progressive democratic development of trade unionism and to the orderly process of collective bargaining and cooperation with employers on the basis of a recognized status." Perkins' statement helped provide the basis for a legal backlash against the tactic, ruled illegal just 2 years later. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Your proud defender of the working class majority, Rick Smith.
So as we've been talking about, this election is so very important. And it's important to be registered. It's important to get out and vote. In fact, I love the fact that people are marching in the streets. I love the fact that, last Saturday there were hundreds of people out here in Pennsylvania, in the Capitol, marching to keep families together. The women's march, the gun sanity marches, all of this stuff, really important. The most important march, though, is going to be on November 6th when people march to the polls and cast their ballots. And cast them for candidates who are going to stand up, speak up, and fight for we, the people, against this administration that has really shown they don't really care about us. And they don't care about what were our values. And are working to, like I've been saying, systematically dismantle the entire 20th century. And one of those people I'm hoping does really well and becomes a representative from Alabama's 3rd Congressional District is Mallory Hagan, former Miss America 2013 advocate, spokesperson, also candidate. Mallory, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I guess the first question, why? Why would you get yourself into this? Why?
I actually was asked to run. A group of people in my district approached me in early January, and laid it out on the table and said, we would love for you to consider being a candidate and our representative. And, looking at the numbers, there are 4 women under 40 in Congress, and looking like that's going to change through this election cycle. But right now, that's what it is as it stands. And we need more generational and gender diversity at the table. And I think that what we're seeing is across the country, young people are getting politically active and very involved. And I'm really proud to have gotten this far.
So you're not thrilled with the policy of a bunch of old male, stale white guys?
I'm not. And the biggest complaint that I hear up and down my district is that Congressman Rogers just doesn't listen. It's very rare that you can get him on the phone, that you can get a response via email. You have to go through a metal detector to get to his office. And so that's just not acceptable. I mean, who do these people work for? They work for us. And I think that that's what the American people are desiring in this election cycle, is somebody who's willing to stand up for them, who's willing to listen to them, and who's going to act on their behalf. And that's what I plan to do. That's what I've been doing. And that's what this campaign's about.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at Republican incumbent Mike Rogers' record, and really, wow, a guy who he wants to abolish the EPA. I mean, to me, right there, that should be a disqualifier for anybody running for office, because they're basically telling us we want to go back to the 70s where you could literally cut the air with a knife, and the water, well, it came with a whole bunch of extra flavoring.
Well, the crazier part about that is that Congressman Rogers is from Anniston, Alabama, where many people have there's a higher rate of cancer because of the lack of environmental protections, rather. And to me, that just says that you don't care about people. If you don't even care about your own neighbors, then where are we as a society, and who are you as a congressman? And that also tells me that corporate money is a problem in politics. If you're being paid off by corporations and not by the people that are in your district or that actually reside across the country, then your interests are obviously skewed.
Yeah, and this comes back to a huge problem in our politics, that it seems that the money has spoken. It used to be that the billionaires had all the money, but we outprocreated them. There were more of us. We went to the polls, we voted, and we didn't have people like Mike Rogers who said, hey, let's abolish the EPA, or, oh, hey, let's pass a tax scheme that's going to benefit those billionaires and screw working people for generations to come, or, hey, let's just pull out of the United Nations altogether. The heck with it. We didn't get those people back then.
Yeah, well, I'm really hoping that this administration is encouraging people to get to the polls. I know that in the state of Alabama, for a couple of decades now, we haven't even had Democratic representation. And now that we do, the Democrats are organized. I tell you what, people in Alabama are excited to work for a candidate these days, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to get them elected. And I'm hoping that that's the sentiment across the country, and we can do something to turn this ship back around.
Yeah, I mean, if you could turn Alabama blue, you could do just about anything.
Well, to me, the definition of insanity, right? Keep doing the same thing over and over again, expect different results. Alabama's at the bottom of the barrel for everything. Healthcare, education, government transparency, like you name it, we're there. And to me, that is a huge issue. If we keep electing the same people and we keep getting the same result, then why are we doing the same thing?
Good point. But you do have Miss America, and you're pretty good at football. You're pretty good at college football.
Yeah, well, we are good at college football. What a thing to be known for.
And so that brings us back to you, because look, it's not about Mike Rogers. It's not about how horrible he is, and his record is. He might be a nice guy. He could be a guy you'd want to sit and have a beer with. I doubt it, but he could be. His voting record is atrocious. So this is really about you. What's the issue that you go, this is why I got into this. I know you said a bunch of people brought you in, and that's great, but what's the passion? What's your issue? What's that one thing at the end you go, this is why I do this?
For me, it's equality. There are several colleges and universities in my district, and as someone who's lived both in New York and Los Angeles, I know what it's like to work hand in hand next to somebody who looks differently than me, who has a different religion than me, who grew up somewhere else than me. And I think that that's really important. Diversity is important in our society, and I feel like we're seeing a further and further divide. And so for me, equality is incredibly important. I'm really proud of the Equal Justice Summit in Alabama. We're seeing some tourism to our state to recognize history, but I'd like to see more of that. And I'd like to be an agent of change when it comes to the conversation around race, when it comes to the conversation around LGBTQ community, and when it comes around the conversation around women's rights.
Yeah, I mean, we went to Alabama a couple years ago. We had done a civil rights tour across the southern U.S., and it seems like all the places that were really horrible to black people now have museums. And say, hey, we were really terrible to these people, but look, we built a museum. Come visit. And some of the really great museums that are there, commemorating how horrible we were to black people.
Well, you can have a museum that actually acknowledges history, or you can have a monument that idolizes it. So I would prefer a museum where we acknowledge that the history existed. We can recognize it and hopefully collectively move forward. I think that's, to me, it's a better option than idolizing something in the middle of a town square.
Yeah, when we'd gone to one, and I forget the name of it, in Birmingham. It's right there near the park where Bull Connor sigged the dogs, right across the street from the 16th Street Baptist Church. And there was I'm not somebody who's prone to tears or any of that, but there was a display in this thing that just sent my eyes watering, because it was the purse of one of the girls killed in the bombing, back then, and it had a couple of little trinkets and things in it that could have been my daughter's stuff, and it was that right. Connection at that moment that made me go, we can't be horrible to people like this anymore.
Right. Well, and it's interesting, because I'm sure you hear this time and time again, like, when did we become so PC? Why is everything so politically correct? And I ask, when did it become so PC to just be nice to each other? Like, that's not being politically correct. When did it become PC to be considerate of someone else and what their experiences might be, and then have compassion for them? I don't think that's politically correct. I just think that's human decency, and we really need to get back to it, or else we're on a train to nowhere.
Yeah, that was so 1960s and 1950s. That was before the Reagan era, kind of hooray for me and the heck with everybody else. Me. It's that, that me-centric stuff, pushing the hyper-individualism, everything's about me. That's when I think all that changed. So maybe you're going to lead that movement back to we, away from me.
I sure hope so. And that's one of the big differences that I've seen in this process, and one of the reasons that I feel like it's really important for all people to get involved. I said, even if I don't win, this is a win-win. I'm hoping that I encourage other young people to get involved in politics and to be a part of their community in a way that sparks change. We can't just have a few people out there leading the charge. We need everybody involved.
No, absolutely, and not just not just young people, but women in particular. I mean, look, I tell my daughters all the time, they have, at this moment in history, they have more opportunities than any women have ever had in the history of civilization. Take advantage of that. Push the boundaries. Do what you can. Go as far as your talents will take you. And I think having role models, people like you who have you've done very well in your career, and now you're saying, look, I'm gonna go to public service, and I'm gonna fight for a better future for all of us.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. I sure hope it pans out. But either way, I will keep up the good fight, whether I'm in office or not.
All right, let me ask you a couple other things. Bang out some healthcare. Where are you on the healthcare spectrum?
I am all for a single payer system. I think that more than anything right now, Alabama needs to focus on the expansion of Medicaid. We've had about 70 rural hospitals close in this last year, and I just don't think that anyone should die because they're poor. So that's where I'm at with healthcare. So
we privatizing Social Security and Medicare and all that. Are we on that bandwagon?
I'm not on that bandwagon. No.
Nor should you be. I would hang up on you. No, I mean, because you've got some people who are preaching that. I think Social Security should be one of those things that not only we secure, but we expand. Because I don't know if you know this, the vast majority of people in this country have no retirement security and no savings. So we're heading towards a major crisis of a bunch of people my age and older who are looking retirement down the road a little bit, going, "Uh-oh, I'm going to work until I die," literally.
Yeah. Well, I think if you ask any millennials, they'll definitely agree with you on that one. So, yeah, for sure.
So as a millennial and as pushing this frame, I'm a big labor guy. I believe that workers should join and form unions. I think that everyone should have the right to collective bargain, because what we've seen, the history is clear. Where you have labor unions, you have good wages, you have health security, you have retirement security, you have a voice, you have safety, you have all of those things. And where you don't have unions, those things are missing and lacking. I'm curious where you are on the labor spectrum.
Well, I'm really proud to have been endorsed by the AFL-CIO, also by the Retail and Wholesale Union. And I think that it's incredibly important for unions to exist because in our district alone, over 50,000 people depend on a manufacturing job. And what we've seen is that some of these manufacturers use things like temporary labor in order to get around hiring someone full-time to deal with health care and things of that nature. And so unions are really the only people who are lobbying for the middle class and lobbying for those workers who can't do those types of negotiations alone. And so I am so pro-union, and I think that they're very important for the forward movement of a state like Alabama. And so, it's things like Janus that make me a little bit concerned that people are trying to dismantle them, but I'm hopeful that won't work.
Yeah, I'm hopeful as well. But, it's going to come back to having politicians who are going to push policy, having citizens who are willing to stand up, step forward, and speak out. And it's about we, the people, telling stories and coming back to community and coming back to each other. That I think is just so important.
I agree. If your neighbor doesn't rise, then none of us do. So I think that it's so important to be involved in your community and to understand that everyone's plight is different. And if not everyone is on the road to success, then none of us are.
So last line of questioning, how can people help? How do folks around the country, how do folks in Alabama help Mallory Hagan become the next representative from Alabama's third congressional district?
Well, I am so proud so far that I've had over 2,000 individual contributions to my campaign, so I would love to add to that. But if you cannot contribute, we can use All Hands on Deck. You can text, you can phone bank, you can do any one of those things if you just go to HagenForHouse.com, or you guys can follow me on social media. I answer every inbox message, so I would love to hear from you. And my Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all of it is at Hagen for House.
There you go. We'll make sure we get that out, and folks have opportunities to chime in, chip in, and maybe help out. Mallory, I appreciate the time, and would love to have you come back and share with us what's going on as you continue this journey towards November.
All right. Thank you so much for having me, and I would love to do that. I'll talk to you soon.
Good stuff. Thanks so much, Mallory Hagan. Make sure you check out her website, HagenForHouse.com. There's a little button in there to help chip in, donate. If you've got $5 or $10 you want to throw her away, it'd be a good thing. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1835. That was the day that textile workers walked off the job at 20 mills in Paterson, New Jersey. But this was not a strike like we might picture one today, with burly men walking the picket line or women chanting as they carry picket signs. In Paterson, most of the strikers were children, ages 10 to 18. Many were young girls. Child labor was in high demand in the silk mills because of their small, nimble fingers. The children walked off the job because they wanted an 11-hour workday and a 6-day work week. They were tired of working 13 grueling hours a day, 7 days a week. Soon, their parents formed the Paterson Association for the Protection of the Working Class to support the strikers. There were no labor unions in Paterson back then. The company refused to negotiate. Women textile workers at other mills in the area also walked off the job. At its peak, 2,000 workers had walked out on strike. Finally, after 6 long weeks, the company agreed to a compromise. They settled on 5 12-hour days and 9 hours on Saturday. The children went back to work to a 69-hour work week. Strike leaders were blacklisted from the mills. This would not be the last time that child laborers took a stand on the job. In 1912, children workers were an important part of the famous Bread and Roses strike of Lawrence, Massachusetts textile workers. In 1933, children workers in Allentown, Pennsylvania sweatshops joined in a strike. Their participation led the governor's wife to join them on the picket line. The strikers there won an increase in wages and reduced hours. Children fought against their exploitation by taking to the picket lines. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
The most important issues.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. So here to give us a thought of what's going on around the world, our good friend Luke Vargas, Talk Media News. Luke, thanks for taking time for us.
That's a pleasure.
So what's going on around the world? I understand China, there is going to be a travel warning?
There is already a travel warning issued today or several days ago and then updated again. This is coming from the Chinese embassy in Washington. This is part of the trade war. They had promised in recent weeks that they wouldn't just be sort of scaling up their retaliation to Trump's tariffs with quantitative tariffs. They would be qualitatively changing their response. And I think this is a sign of how they're going to try and do that, which is putting out a warning to Chinese citizens saying, look, the U.S. is unsafe. Schools aren't safe. There's a lot of crime. You know, medical bills are expensive. You need to think about your financial capacity to pay for healthcare treatment before you go to a hospital in the United States, all these sorts of things, saying rule of law and order is not good in the United States. There's shootings, there's robberies, theft is frequent, blah, blah, blah. I mean, these are sort of standard warnings the U.S. puts out about a lot of other countries and China puts out about various other countries, but it's new for them to be really being quite so critical of the United States in their travel warnings. And it's not based upon any, robberies haven't spiked in the last year and medical bills haven't gotten dramatically more expensive. This is a decision, it seems, to try and limit or deny a certain portion of Chinese tourist revenues to the United States as a result of this trade war. So an interesting sort of, asymmetrical tariff response from the Chinese. We'll see what comes next. But at least when it comes to the medical bills and the danger in schools, they're not lying, right? I mean, it is certainly an American phenomenon that we've got to think about your capacity to pay for healthcare treatment influencing whether or not you even go to the hospital. And the Chinese government basically telling their citizens that's how it works in the United States. Take notice. Seems like a good warning to me.
Yeah, steal a line from the Big Lebowski. You're not wrong, Walter.
There you go.
It is what it is. And maybe these are one of those things. Will we take the warning and say, look, this is how, someone else around the world is viewing us? Because look, crime is still high, not as high as it used to be back in the 70s, but still up there. And our schools, especially in the inner cities, are crumbling. And so does this travel warning, does this extend to our colleges and universities? Because we get a lot of Asian students here in the U.S., especially the ones paying full tuition.
Well, they're not. They're not changing the rules about Chinese students going abroad. I think there's something like 600,000 Chinese students every year that are seeking higher education outside of China. Those numbers probably aren't going to go down, and I'm not even sure tourism visits are going to go down because of this. But it's a way of sort of publicly embarrassing us. And you sort of asked earlier, are we going to take this as an objective outside opinion about situations in the U.S. and respond? I'm reminded of Nikki Haley responding a few days ago when there was a very well-researched report by a number of United Nations experts that talked about extreme poverty and inequality in the United States. And I don't remember Nikki Haley's exact terms, but she basically said, it's entirely, it's unconscionable that the UN would talk to us about poverty. But no, really? I mean, these are experts who go around the world and they give similar reports when they see inequality in other countries. This is not an administration that really, gives much credence to what other folks are saying about conditions within the United States.
Yeah, and I don't need a UN report to tell me that. I've been to South Carolina. I've been to parts of Virginia, West Virginia. I've been through the southern part of the U.S. and a good part of the southwestern part of the U.S. And I've also been to Cleveland and Detroit and a lot of urban centers that have mass inequality and massive poverty and kids who are going to school hungry and homeless kids and all of that stuff. So I don't need a UN report to tell me, but it's good that there is one to smack Nikki Haley upside the head with.
Yeah, well, she's running away from any of those objective outside assessments about as fast as she can, it seems.
No, because we're better than that. We're number one. Don't forget that, Luke. We're number one. And I understand Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State's heading to North Korea after the big holiday. What are we expecting?
Well, he's going to try and figure out exactly what, if anything, can be done to advance the North Korean denuclearization. I mean, by all accounts, we've now had 4 major reports in the last 2 weeks. I think when I was on the program a week ago, we talked about maybe a report by a group called 38 North, which has seen some continued enrichment activity at a major plant and perhaps upgrades to a nuclear energy facility, but also a facility that's produced fissile material for the North Korean weapons program in the past. Add to that a report by the Middlebury Institute, a Washington Post report on Saturday, and an NBC News report from last Friday. We're basically getting a pretty complete picture that both outside or independent intelligence assessments and U.S. intelligence agency assessments suggest the North Koreans are upgrading nuclear facilities, upgrading missile production facilities, and actively taking steps to conceal their enrichment activity. All of which is to say, I think we are moving to, this is my commentary hat, but I think we're moving towards very quickly a situation that mirrors the U.S. intelligence community having a very clear understanding that Russia tried to influence the 2016 election, President Trump rejecting that because admitting that would be politically costly for him. We are now getting to a point where there does seem to be a major overlap in intelligence assessments believing the North Koreans to be actively undermining or failing to live up to the promises they made to Trump in Singapore. And it will be up to Trump to decide whether or not he listens to that intelligence or he takes Kim at face value, much like he's done with Vladimir Putin, and says, you know, I would expect, Rick, over the next few weeks or months, North Korea will have some big, flashy destruction of more facilities or say, you know, have some inspectors there to dismantle a few nukes. And Trump will say, as he already has, that the threat has been neutralized. And then we'll be dealing with continued intel community reports saying quite the opposite. And he will probably, as we've seen in the past, say those intelligence, you know, just disagree with them and say that the fake news media is the one that's what's responsible for, you know, being so critical of the progress that's been made, just trying to undercut his diplomatic successes. I mean, maybe 6-9 months ago wouldn't have seen such a cynical future laid out so clearly in front of me, but there is not really many reports right now that I'm seeing that suggest the North Koreans are doing anything to denuclearize, and quite the opposite.
Well, I mean, it's exactly what I had predicted would happen. That, you know, he would go, we've made a great deal. They would shake hands. It'd be a great photo op. He'd come away saying, I made the deal. It's over. It's great. Everything's terrific, fantastic. And They would just keep doing what they were doing. And it sounds like, you know, they've just gone a little bit underground with it. And look, it's not, I got to be honest, not surprising to me. It's just not surprising to me with this guy.
No, I don't think this is a shock. It's just unfortunate to see it all come together. And I guess, you know, as I'm sort of starting to look at possibly heading over to Helsinki for the big Trump-Putin summit, we've been hearing that what the Russians are likely going to try and make the centerpiece of that meeting is some sort of pledge, not very toothy at its core, but quite symbolically important for the U.S. and Russia to pledge to eliminate a small number of nuclear warheads, sort of to resume what was called the New START Treaty, pursued by President Obama and Dmitry Medvedev. And so, you know, who knows? It could be one of those situations where, you know, Putin tells Trump he didn't election meddle and, Trump insults NATO and has a very frosty NATO summit. And then the White House just says, oh, well, disregard all of that. At least we agreed to reduce nuclear warheads by 200 each. It's, you know, why are, you know, Democrats being so critical of the president's foreign policy agenda? So I don't know. Again, I have a cynical take on how the whole Helsinki summit is going to go, and it follows a lot of the script we've seen with North Korea so far, I think.
And again, for me, another summit where our con man gets conned. Just that simple to me. And you brought up NATO. You know, this week you also had the president. I guess they sent a letter to NATO. You know, several of our NATO allies. You know, we want more money, and you know, what's going on?
Yeah, this has happened in the past. I mean, look, the United States under President George W. Bush and President Obama were pushing European countries, members of NATO, to increase their military spending, and largely they've been dragging their feet. After the invasion of Crimea,
they got better things to spend it on, you know, like education and healthcare.
That's certainly what they think. I mean, if you drop in and listen to the German parliament discussing it, that's pretty much the determination they keep making. There are several countries, particularly in the Baltic, that have been increasing their military spending. The NATO sort of alliance basically has said, we're going to aim to spend 2% of our national GDP on the military. And as far as I know, only a very small handful of the NATO countries have gotten there. This is the, target that Trump is dangling over their heads. And again, 2%, it's not clear exactly what capacity you suddenly unlock when you spend that much. The experts I've talked to will say the spending amount is less important than, who spends on what. That even if every country spent 1% of their GDP, but they all coordinated their spending, and, not every country were trying to manufacture tanks, and every fifth country did tanks, and every fifth country did cyber, and every fifth did aerospace, and then actually it's wise spending. So perhaps we are holding these countries to an unrealistic target, or at least we could maximize their resources better. But Trump is probably going to, I think this letter suggests that Trump is going to go into this NATO meeting and say that anyone that hasn't made a pledge or doesn't make a pledge to hit 2% when he's there in their presence is going to get isolated. And we've seen, sort of threats, including to the British, saying, look, you're going to lose your standing in Europe if you don't increase your military spending. So this does seem to be the issue President Trump is going to measure the worthiness of our allies by. And again, imagining sort of a 1-2 punch here where Trump is very critical of NATO in front of our NATO allies in Brussels next week, and then goes to meet with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki, a man who has found very clever ways to undermine the NATO alliance at every turn. And Trump himself seems to be increasingly open to floating the idea of a U.S. withdrawal from NATO, not full stop necessarily, but at least sort of rethinking our level of engagement with the alliance. I think a lot hangs on whether these countries do make those military spending pledges. Again, whether or not that's the wisest thing for them from a budget standpoint is a topic for debate. But I think Trump is basically found one issue, a very simplistic read to measure the worthiness of our allies, and that's what he's going to be looking for.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Let's go over to France. Evidently, the environmental group Greenpeace conducted a little stunt. What happened?
Yeah, this is a Greenpeace French chapter. They hooked up a drone and put a Superman cape on it and got a whole bunch of other drones in the airspace and flew it at a nuclear energy plant in the Rhone Valley and crashed it into the wall of a cooling tower. And the whole stunt was meant to illustrate, lax safety, the fact that there's a big risk of some sort of aerial attack on these nuclear plants. It's interesting. I mean, I've talked to several experts today asking them if this is overblown. They say, look, I mean, the United States is relatively good when it comes down to guarding our nuclear facilities, though there have been notable exceptions, as when an 83-year-old nun in 2013 broke into a Tennessee nuclear warhead storage place in Tennessee and, ran amok around there and as a stunt. But in Europe, there are problems, including a report out a few days ago that said basically that the British government has spent 7 years stalling a major investigation into whether or not it's safe to be transporting their nuclear warheads around in these truck convoys. So, again, I think we are seeing some signs that in countries that have these major nuclear energy programs, there might be some complacency that causes major security gaps. Campaigners will say that's reason not to have nuclear energy. I don't think that's a conclusion everybody comes to. Maybe they would say, just let's secure it better. But it is certainly a stunt that I think is a good topic for discussion.
Yeah, good stuff. And finally, good news. Little good news for I guess into the 4th of July. The Thailand, the kids from Thailand, the soccer team. I guess they've been found.
They have. This is 13 people who have been in a cave now for 11 days. They were there sort of on a field trip with their soccer coach. When the flood waters started rising, the rains were falling, and they had to retreat further and further into the cave. They've now been located, I think, about 0.6 of a mile from the cave entrance, which isn't a lot if you're walking around. It's quite a lot if you're in scuba equipment and trying to navigate with zero visibility, which is how rescuers finally found them. The kids are alive. They are in decent health, all things considered. I guess there's water they can drink, if not food. And now the topic of debate is whether you take people who have no scuba experience and try to put suits on them and guides and try to get them to swim out, which would be very treacherous and some experts say potentially dangerous, or if you wait out the rains, which some say could take until October. You kind of got to hook them up with some basic life support systems within the cavern and hope they can all last until then. It's not great options there, but it's much better news after, folks in Thailand at least were very apprehensive and biting their nails for more than a week, hoping these kids were okay. So again, a little bright spot.
Yeah. Could you send it a little sub?
My understanding is that this is a cave where there are parts that are flooded, and then you reach a little bit of a outcropping, and then you have to walk, and then you have to go back into the water. And I think the sort of trenches and caverns are very, very narrow, and so this is quite complicated even for world-class divers. So again, it's crazy. It's a horrible situation, but it's a little bit of good news at the end of a very stressful week.
Yeah, no, I did. We scuba dived for a long time, and I've had well over 100 dives, and cave diving, no way.
Yeah, you couldn't pay me.
Nope, no way. I mean, the confines, nope. So wow, that's a tough call. But look, if it's a life or death situation, and that's the only way to get out, I think maybe you go that route, but we'll find out. Luke, I appreciate the time. Happy holiday to you and yours. Look forward to talking to you again real soon.
Thank you, Rick. Take care.
Good stuff. Our good friend Luke Vargas, Talk Media News. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show for working people from the talk.
For and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 Minutes. Americans can expect to hear a lot of this on tomorrow's 4th of July holiday. Fireworks. But at America's nuclear energy plants and warhead storage sites, fingers will be crossed not to hear the sound of an approaching drone. Early on Tuesday, a drone decked out with a Superman cape crashed into a French nuclear energy site in the town of Bugey. Greenpeace said their stunt was aimed at exposing lax security at the complex, and they may have a point. Greenpeace activists in Sweden made a similar point in 2012 by using ladders to scale the perimeter walls of a nuclear plant, as police barely batted an eye.
They are isolated incidents, but it kind of brings into the larger question of nuclear security, right? What are we doing to mitigate, to reduce the risk of nuclear and radiological terrorism?
Dr. Sarah Kuches-Fahani is a senior policy analyst at the Center for Arms Control and Nonproliferation in Washington.
Yes, these incidents happen. But on the whole, the nuclear weapons countries, the countries that have nuclear energy programs, I do think they do a pretty good job in kind of maintaining the safety and security of their weapons materials.
In the United States, Kuches-Fahani says one possible area of concern is the safety of radiological materials in the public space, particularly in hospitals. For instance, cesium-137, used mainly in blood irradiators, which if it fell into the wrong hands could be used in a radiological dispersal device. But on the whole, she says, security incidents at American nuclear sites, as when an 83-year-old nun broke into a nuclear weapons complex in Tennessee in 2013, have seen America's already secure sites locked down even more in recent years.
Not to say that since then security has been abundantly improved. Security has always been very, very tight here in the United States.
Luke Vargas, the United Nations.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
We want the world and we want it now. We're going to take it anyhow. We want the airwaves. That's right. We want the airwaves. That's right. We want the airwaves.
So some good news coming out of Oregon. If you're someone who believes that we should just poison workers. Evidently, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration there in Oregon has said it's okay for farm workers and their families to be sheltered in place. Evidently, there had been a ruling that required farm workers to be 100 feet from where trucks and planes were spraying pesticides. 100 feet. It isn't all that far. You're dumping tons of poison all over the place. I don't know that you really should be breathing that on that close of a basis without some type of respirator, without something. Oregon farmers went nuts. We spray in the morning when we'd have to wake all them up and they'd have to get out because, where they live is right there in the fields. And basically, they're just spraying stuff right over top of them. Evidently, 2/3 of Oregon's 314 registered labor camps are in just 2 counties where they do a bunch of this stuff at, where most of the pear and the cherry orchards are. Now what the Department of Oregon Occupational Health and Safety Administration is saying, you can keep the people in their dwelling, whatever that may be. It could be a tent. Just zip it up. Just don't let any air in. As long as the doors, the windows, and the air intakes are all closed, and that the pesticides don't need a respirator on the label. Other than that, just poison away. And the thing that gets me is, I remember there was a couple years ago, 2013, we had done a labor history tour. And, while we were in Toledo, I met a guy who was who was a farm worker organizer from North Carolina, and we were we were ready to go down and spend a week picking tobacco, of which I kept saying, look, you really don't want to do this, and I'm like, no, I want to give it a try. I want to experience firsthand what these people go through, and for some reason it never seemed to work out. But as I was researching it, as I was trying to figure out what it is I was getting myself into, I realized quickly that this is not good work. And that what they would do is they would cover the tobacco fields with like tarps or stuff, and they would spray the pesticides in this confined area where the people were still picking, where the people were still working, and they were basically being poisoned. And what what are they going to say? They're undocumented workers. And again, I come back to this of why I'm against the idea of having underground labor. And this is right there, right front and center in what happens. You have this kind of exploitation. You have this kind of, we're going to break the rules and we're going to poison you and your family just because you want to eat, and getting away with it. And then, just ignoring the laws that are in place to protect workers. And yes, I know if we don't poison them, we won't have cheap labor and we won't have cheap cherries. I get the argument. But at the end of the day, basic humanity and basically saying, look, we're going to have policies that, move them maybe 200 feet away, move them away and let the stuff go downriver to the other people. It's just, I don't know, it's just mind blowing to me. And yet these are the issues that we're not talking about at all. We're talking about, whatever Trump tweets out for today, while people are being literally poisoned. Angering, frustrating, but sadly not something new. Anyway, if you've missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com, that's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, our good friend Scott Dworkin's going to be here to share some thoughts on today's Senate Intel Committee revelations. Also, Michael Cohen flipping or flopping or begging for a pardon. Lots and lots to get to. Quick break, right back.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
Generals plan wars, but battlefield commanders do the bloody work. So meet HUD Secretary Ben Carson, a quiet but bloodstained commandante in General Trump's relentless war against poverty-stricken Americans. Carson is loyally serving the extreme right wing's ideological crusade to destroy the very idea of housing subsidies for poor families. He has taken a budget axe to the program that enforces our society's fair housing laws, and he even stripped the words "free from discrimination" out of HUD's mission statement. Such sneak attacks, however, were deemed too subtle by Trump's political base of hardcore haters of poverty programs, so the commander-in-chief demanded a frontal assault on the poorest of the poor. Carson delivered, dutifully proposing legislation to triple the monthly rent that the most impoverished of public housing families would pay, including increased rents for the elderly and disabled. To add cruelty to this nastiness, Carson also called for eliminating child care and medical deductions that public housing families can subtract from their rent payments. He tried to pass off this cold-blooded ambush of real people as merely a bureaucratic, quote, streamlining, calling it necessary to cut the federal deficit. That's a despicable ruse, for the deficit was deliberately and grossly inflated just a few months ago, not by poor people, but by the trillion-dollar tax giveaway passed by Trump and the Republican Congress for the very richest people in America. And let's not forget that Carson himself was willing to bloat that deficit when he recently tried to spend taxpayers' money on a $31,000 dining set for his office suite. Fortunately, this plutocratic purchase was exposed and canceled, but was he embarrassed? Nah. This is Jim Hightower saying, so Trump, Carson, and the GOP Congress critters have also added hypocrisy to the nastiness and cruelty of their ongoing war against the poor.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
Rebels are we, though heavy our hearts shall always be. No ball or chain, no prison shall keep where the rebels of the sacred heart. I said no ball or chain, no prison shall keep where the rebels of the sacred heart.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Our quote of the day comes from Richard Burr, Republican from North Carolina, chairman of the Senate Intel Committee. He says the committee has spent the last 16 months reviewing the sources, tradecraft, and analytic work underpinning the intelligence community assessment and sees no reason to dispute the conclusions. What that means in human speak, the Russians meddled. Basically everything that we've been saying from the beginning, that our intelligence committee was saying, hey, look over here. The intelligence community was saying, look over here, is accurate. I'm here to share some thoughts on what this means, if anything. I've asked our good friend Scott Dworkin to come talk with us, co-founder of the Democratic Coalition, also host of the Dworkin Report. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, how are you?
I'm good. So what do we read into this?
It's an admission from it's very weird timing because there were Republican senators in Moscow today meeting with the Kremlin, and that's not even, can't believe that sentence exists, but they were meeting with them, and so it was released today as well, and I think it was to counter the propaganda that was to come from this meeting. And the only thing that I can think of is that Burr is possibly in trouble because he was a co-chair of the transition. And he was, it's obvious why he chose Nunes and Burr as the co-chairs of the transition, both Intel chairs. Both would have been conflicted, both would have been involved. So, maybe he's having finally a change, en route. I don't think he'll ever be with us fully because he's the same guy who also said, Hillary should have a bullseye on her back. I'm excited to see what's next because this is really setting the stage for, the fact that Trump lied and about everything. And while they were interfering in our elections, they were doing it with the Trump campaign in tandem. Call it collusion, call it conspiracy, call it working together in a partnership. But the bottom line is this is proof that our largest enemy in the world, our greatest foe in the world, is Putin and the Russian government, by far, not even close. And people are worried about North Korea and Iran. You shouldn't be. You shouldn't be. You should be worried about Russia, absolutely. Because not only have they had to expel over 100 spies in the last year from here, they've also, taken over our different infrastructure points, power companies, water supply, defense systems, hacking into, I believe, the Pentagon or subsidiaries where there's contractors. And these are acts of war, every single one. We've gone to war with other countries for less. And so it's very interesting to see what's going to be next because this sets the stage for Republicans to have no defense except for treason.
Yeah, but let me ask you this, because you look at this statement and you look at the House's position, Nunes's committee, and they're completely opposites, polar opposites, like day and night.
Yeah, it's like a different world. But I really think that the key is, as people start to get maybe a little bit frustrated with the pace of everything, once evidence starts to come out from Mueller and from those court proceedings and everything that's happening, it's gonna be, this is the evidence, you're a liar. Like, it's indisputable, because he's not gonna take it this far. He's not. Who are these people flipping it on? Like, come on, they're not flipping on anybody else except for Trump. And so, at the end of the day, I think that Devin Nunes, again, I've been told by multiple people that they've been told to stay away from him, his staff, his Intel Committee staff, because they assume that he's under investigation right now by the federal government, and these people know what they're talking about. It's kind of funny to see it on the Hill where people are separating a little bit, but it will be after this July 4th, and probably worse after Labor Day. Then you'll start to see the cracks, because people will realize, I might lose my seat. I have to campaign for myself. I haven't campaigned in a decade. And then, this young person is running against me with progressive values, and they have all these talking points, and all I'm going to have is Trump. Look at what Trump's doing, and look what we've accomplished. They won't have any accomplishments. I've been there before, where the Republicans are in 2010. I've been there before. We all were. Yeah. And so, I remember how cocky I was going into we got this. And I remember, it was a bloodbath. And so it happens in history, every time there's a switch over of parties from president, it seems to happen. And I think it's going to happen again. It's just, how bad will it be? And so they can talk a big game and act like we stand for nothing. When we can stand for the basics, like humanity, like not supporting people who are pedophiles, and the rampant corruption. The list goes on and on. And one by one, I think these people will go down, just like Manafort, just like Flynn, just like Papadopoulos, just like Van der Schwan, and the list goes on and on. And don't forget, there's more indictments coming.
No, you're right. So let me ask you about you're saying there are people flipping all the time. And, the big news this week was obviously Michael Cohen and his, statement that, family and country first. Was that a signal that he's willing to flip, he's flipped, or was that a signal to Trump to saying, hey, I need a lifeline, bail me out here?
As a PR stunt that was probably planned in tandem with Trump to try and get public back on his side, to act like he's some sort of hero when he's still a traitor. He's the guy who, Trump and him, if you catch one, you're catching the other. So they were business partners on the largest level. To act like Michael Cohen also is poor, this guy's worth at least $500 million. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind, because he owns so many properties. He owns over 100 million properties, and they all act like they're poor and dopey. At the end of the day, Cohen was the guy who picks up the money. Cohen's the bagman. Cohen's the guy who makes these deals, finalizes them in person. He's the face, with the sinister part of the Trump organization. And he's been that for years. So it's, I think that they're all caught, and they're trying to do a tug, like a yank and pull back and forth, which is something that Trump does great. He causes the chaos, and it makes it so he feels like he's in control, so he can control the bad stuff and the good stuff and try to counter it so it balances out, so people don't lose interest in the media, and also they can build from there on any BS that they want. And then when they have a jab, he takes it. And he does that, and it's his strategy, is just repeat with every single thing. And if it's not chaos, if there's proof that comes out, then he kind of cowers and either pays off the person or, gets in trouble.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, because, there's, there are people asking, is impeachment imminent? Will we see that down the road? And for me, I'm looking at this choice for Supreme Court that Trump is going to have. And there's one guy, this Kavanaugh, who evidently doesn't think that the president, should be held accountable to any of this stuff. Do you think that's going to play into his choice for who he nominates for Supreme Court?
I think that the number one thing that he's looking for in a Supreme Court nominee is the willingness to repeal, overturn Roe v. Wade. I know that for a fact. that there's no way that Trump cares or knows who should be a Supreme Court justice. He's going to nominate who Mike Pence tells him to. And Mike Pence, his life goal, his entire life goal for everything right now, forever, for years, has been to overturn that. And so, I think it's very clear they're going to try and play the sinister game. What I've heard is they're going to try to get a woman nominee so people can act like she's more pro-choice or more pro-women because she's a woman, even though the women that are nominees are worse than the men. So I don't know. I don't think that, first of all, I don't think that anybody under criminal investigation should be able to choose a Supreme Court justice or nominate anybody. Not only that, I think that if we need to change the rules, then so be it. But I think there's been one resignation for the Supreme Court and with threat of impeachment, and then there's been one Supreme Court justice impeached before. But if Trump gets impeached, Gorsuch should be removed as well, and this nominee, and any other appointee that he made, especially if anything's linked to conspiracy against the United States. I mean, there's going to need to be a complete reset. I call it the Obama reset, to get us back in the game and, as a world leader again. So I think we're in a better spot than we were yesterday, but we're in a pretty terrible spot right now.
No, I'm with you, but all that stuff should go. The poison fruit, if you will. How do you undo the damage they've already done? Because even if you remove him today, there's a generation worth of damage already done. And I look at this Janus decision. I look at the Epic Systems decision by this court. I look at all of the things that should not have gone the way they've gone had you had a Merrick Garland on the court.
Right, or if you had Hillary Clinton as president, and that's a key thing to think about. If Hillary were president, who'd be appointed? We would have a progressive Supreme Court or leaning that way. And again, I'm sure that it's not in the grand scheme of things, but with the influence campaign that came out today, that's another indication that this is the ripple effect, the dominoes that fall from that. And so essentially, as crazy as it may sound, Putin helped push for a more conservative Supreme Court to cause more chaos in America. And he is that methodical. He is that meticulous. People need to shape up with that. He's smarter than Trump, okay, by a landslide.
No question.
And he's sinister. His goal is evil, and it's to destroy the United States. He even said over dinner, casually one time, that he could destroy the United States in 30 minutes or less, and that was a few years back. He's not a guy that we like. He's not a guy. He's our greatest enemy. He is our Osama bin Laden. He committed the online version of 9/11. And we don't know what they did physically in person to interfere with our elections. We don't know if they affected candidates, if they did investigations, if they blackmailed people, if they had honeypots, which is when they have women or men sexually blackmail them.
Yeah, the Golden Showers tape, sure.
Right, and that's another thing. We may not need something like that. We may just need Don Jr. and Trump talking about lifting sanctions with somebody else. I mean, it's very simple. Again, this evidence that is going to come forward is so damning that there's no way out for Trump, and there's no way out for anybody. I think, again, once he bankrupts the country like he bankrupts his other businesses, he'll do the same thing that he always does, and that's bolt. And then act like he never was president and, move on from that and go back to some kind of reality show on Fox News.
He'll cash in, which is why, to bring, to highlight the point with Putin, which is why the reporting today was that Putin feels, quote, absolutely comfortable in all formats that are comfortable for his interlocutors, and it doesn't rule out a private meeting. In fact, wants this, because you're right. I think he's a lot smarter than any president we've had other than Obama over the last couple of years, which is why you didn't hear a comment out of Obama like, "I looked into his soul." what is it with these authoritarian types that look at Putin and go, yeah, we love that guy?
I think they lead by example. They think of him as the example of how you can take over a country and bleed it dry and then distribute it to your friends and keep them accountable and make it a mafia state. And that's what Trump's essentially doing. He gets rid of as much government as possible, as much oversight as possible, as much intelligence kind of gathering as possible, as much diplomacy as possible. It all adds up to if someone were a Russian spy and they were the president of the United States, every single thing he's done would be exactly what Putin would order him to do based on that situation. It could be something ranging from healthcare repeal and presentation of that. It could be to cause chaos. It could be something along the lines of, if you do this, then I'll make sure that you have a piece of this oil deal. If you move your troops from here to here, if you let me have Crimea, like these are different things that are on the table. And again, if George W. Bush, let's say a year after 9/11, went and sat down with Osama bin Laden, that's what's happening here between Trump and Putin. And we really need to think about the fact that a cyber terror attack is a terrorist attack. And the 9/11 version of that happened to us. And this domino effect we see now all links back to Putin's interference in the election, because if he did not win, then and he didn't win in my mind, but if he did not win, he wouldn't have won without Putin's help. And that was, I think, the bottom line from today's assessment is that, it was an invalid election. He's right. It was, that's the one thing Trump was right about. He's broadcasting himself again, but is the fact that the election, there was election fraud, and it involved the Russians and the Trump campaign.
So will we be able to know by November if 2018 is going to be meddled with, hacked, whatever you want to talk about? Are our ballots secure? Is this election cycle going to be rigged? And if that's the case, what's the point in participating?
Because the only way to beat it is to win at the polls. They already are interfering in our elections right now. They already have interfered in every single special election that we've had. They've already interfered in our daily efforts. They attack, American kids, like the folks from Parkland. They attack them on the regular basis. They provide fake news on the internet, and then also use bots to attack them, make threats to them. And they've done this for a while now, for years now, and they target American citizens to do cyber warfare against them, to make them look bad, to make them feel bad, and to try to hurt them in every way but physical. And that, again, we need to take that, an attack on American in that way is an attack on all of us. And that's the kind of camaraderie we need, if we want to use that word. It's the kind of togetherness that we need, and we don't, and that's what people will realize. There's gonna be a point, there'll be a day, a second, where it turns and people are like, oh my God, this crazy guy Scott, who's been running around talking about this madness for 2 years, was right. At the level, it's more disturbing than anybody could ever thought. And everything we take for granted, they took advantage of. And what we're going to have to realize, we'll have to admit to ourselves, that we got fooled and we can't be fooled again. And again, they are already interfering in our elections. They are already doing it right now. They are already trying to hack into our election systems. They are already attacking Americans to try to get them to not vote, to try to get them to stray away from voting or be disturbed from images, stay away from tweeting on the internet, piss them off, get them triggered in some way. And usually it would be a person in the Russian military or a contractor that's working on the back end of that in multiple accounts. And so you tell me, if a Russian military operative is sitting there on a computer cyber attacking, a 70-year-old woman in Ohio, is that an attack on Americans? If she's getting spam and the cuss words sent to her and death threats from Russians, isn't that an attack? And that's how we need to start thinking about it. But there will come a point, and I'm sure it's going to be based on evidence, where people wake up and they're like, oh my God, we're under attack.
So the response to this, and what I've been saying is, you're right. They're going to meddle. They're going to continue to do what they've gotten away with until we absolutely stop it. So the answer to this, in my view, is overwhelming numbers to the polls, overwhelming numbers of people turning out to vote. Because you can rig a percentage, you can't rig, a huge percentage, or can you?
Again, it's chipping away in little ways. So shortening voting hours, shortening the time period of early voting.
Yeah, but that's Republicans doing that stuff. That's not the Russians.
No. I'm just saying that it's a combined effort, and we need to accept that, because they cannot keep Congress without Russia's help. That's the bottom line here. So that's what I'm trying to make clear, is it is an integrated force. Now you can see it, and we have proof with that, like Devin Nunes and other members of Congress embracing hashtags that were created by Russians and then pushed by Russians to support them, that they then embraced and then took over the marketing for. But they all have assistance from Russian trolls. A lot of these boycotts, like Boycott Walmart, Russians were behind that one too. And these are different, they'll take over different hashtags or push this new civil war. Like, that wasn't Americans pushing a new civil war. That were the Russians trying to push that, and then we added the part to the hashtag of the letters. Like, that is cyber warfare. And who's fighting them? It's American people. It's people in the resistance. And so, again, because our government won't be authorized to fight them by Donald Trump, okay, we're going to continue to be intact, and we just have to be accepting of that and fight back in the ways that we can.
And that's the answer. So let me ask you a last line of questioning, because you look at what's going on. You look at the Supreme Court nominee. Is there any way of stopping the damage right now? I mean, because every day that this administration gets to make new policy and gets to put more people, pack more people onto the courts, and continue to do what they've been doing, things get worse. Is there any way to stop this nominee? Who, if I'm looking at the list that evidently they've interviewed, there isn't one I find acceptable on there. Is there any way to stop that?
No.
There's the answer.
And, we're working on it. And we learned a lot from the Gorsuch nomination process. And we've, I think it's more along the lines of, after July 4th here, think of it as the playoffs. After Labor Day, it's getting close to the Super Bowl. And so it's a full sprint right after the 4th here. And that will be one of the items that we'll be pushing, is for him to have no nomination whatsoever. I guess I can tell you that, the first person I tell. But we're going to do a campaign that pushes for the fact that he should not have any right whatsoever to nominate anybody while he's under any criminal investigation of any type from any agency, state, federal agency, or anywhere else. And guess what? There's so many to count. They won't be done.
No, I'm with you. But, here's the thing. The day that Anthony Kennedy said he was resigning, I was saying the exact same thing. That nothing for you. We're cutting you off, and what we ended up with is a scenario where, McConnell came out and said, you know what, we're pushing this forward. We're going to do what we got to do. No, but the thing is my fear is that there's no stopping this. They steamroll right through.
I think that we have a more united, a stronger force than we ever have before. This is a peaceful, progressive revolution in the making, and I think that we have the capability to stop it. Whether or not we're able to, based on numbers, based on what people actually commit themselves to. But I think our voices are louder than ever. I think we're more united than ever. And one of the best looks that you can get on July 4th tomorrow what I recommend everybody doing tomorrow, if you feel like talking about politics. If you don't, then take a day off. But if you do, then I recommend that you tell your friends and anybody else who doesn't know that the resistance is mostly Democrats. And if they're Republicans, the look of terror is so hilarious that they don't know. They don't understand that it's a tandem sort of effort, that the backbone of the party is the resistance. And so the Democratic Party is united. We do stand for a lot of things. Who do you think is marching in the streets?
Yep.
You know, and that's the most of us.
So the hope is we take from marching in the streets now to marching to the polls in November and sweep these bums out. That simple. Scott, I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Great talking with you, our good friend Scott Dworkin. You know, look, at the end of it, he's spot on. We've got to be active. We've got to be involved. We've got to be pushing back at every opportunity. And by all means, make sure you're registered to vote and make sure that you get out to vote. Again, thanks so much, Scott. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Me and my people are through. Me and my people are ready. Me and my people are just about due. I'm a massive airstrike on a beautiful night. Yeah, it's my song I'm singing. Somebody better start counting. We're coming out. We're coming out swinging.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
Scrubbed, yes, sir. Of the official EPA administrator's schedule.
Absolutely, which happened quite a bit.
Whistleblower says EPA Chief Scott Pruitt kept secret calendar to hide industry meetings.
This is a really sad day for Minnesota. That's what this is.
Minnesota regulators approve controversial new tar sands pipeline. Record overnight heat in Oman. Drought-fueled riots in Iran. Plus...
And that's just the tip of this melting iceberg.
Rhode Island becomes the first state to sue fossil fuel companies for knowingly contributing to climate change.
All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
I could stand here all day and cite many other PowerPoints on the damages that could be caused.
Oh, please don't. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, we're getting ready to stand down for the holidays, so I guess it's only right that we have, just one or two more Scott Pruitt corruption stories before we go.
Yep, the hits just keep on coming. An EPA whistleblower testifying to the House Oversight Committee says EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt directed his staff to scrub his official calendar to hide meetings and said they kept a secret schedule to hide controversial meetings and calls with industry representatives. That's according to Pruitt's former Deputy Chief of Staff, Kevin Chmielewski. Altering or deleting records could be a violation of records-keeping laws. Pruitt is now under at least 15 active investigations for his questionable ethics practices, lavish spending, and retaliation against employees who questioned his actions.
Yeah, but these latest charges are from just another liberal Obama. Wait, you said it was his former chief of staff?
Deputy Chief of Staff.
Uh-oh.
Meanwhile, a dangerous heat wave is sizzling much of the U.S. this week, but the city of Kiryat in the Arab nation of Oman has got it even worse. Kiryat broke the world record for the hottest overnight temperature in recorded history on Friday night with an overnight low of 109 degrees.
That was the low.
Yes, that is the lowest temperature in 24 hours, and the city remained at that extreme heat level for more than 48 hours. Climate scientists warn that average overnight temperatures around the world are trending higher, another sign of global warming. In southern Iran, the most severe drought in more than 30 years is exacerbating unrest in the already volatile Middle East. AP reports that Iranian security forces fired on demonstrators on Sunday who were protesting water scarcity. Residents of Khorramshahr in southern Iran near the border with Iraq are protesting salty and muddy water coming out of their taps and blame government mismanagement for lack of clean drinking water. Here in the U.S., the Minnesota Public Utilities Utility Commission has approved the controversial new Enbridge 3 tar sands pipeline against the recommendations of the State Department of Commerce and Administrative Law Judge and over the objections of Native American tribes who say it poses an unacceptable threat to their drinking water and wild food resources. The new pipeline will allow significant increases in tar sands crude oil transported from Canada across Minnesota to refineries in the U.S. Midwest. Winona LaDuke of the Indigenous environmental advocacy group Honor the Earth pledged that they will not give up the fight.
Because someone has to stand for the water. Someone has to stand for future generations. We are not backing down. We are here, we will stand here because we have been here for 10,000 years. We're the home team, and we're not going anywhere.
In California, the Trump U.S. Forest Service has reissued a permit to bottled water company Nestle to continue to pull millions of gallons of water a year out of the San Bernardino National Forest in Southern California. Nestle had previously been exposed for withdrawing water in the drought-prone region without a permit for decades. But the U.S. Forest Service has forgiven all that.
Well, that's good, and now Nestle is going to pay their fair share for this water that they're drawing out of California, right?
Not so much. The total annual cost for Nestle to withdraw 36 million gallons of water a year is just $524.
$524 million.
Nope.
$1,000.
Nope, just dollars.
Wow.
Finally, in a press conference on Monday, Rhode Island Attorney General Peter Kilmartin announced the state has filed suit against the oil industry, becoming the first state in the United States to sue the major oil companies to recover the costs of damages to Rhode Island's coastal communities and economy. The suit alleges that oil industry executives knew their products contributed to dangerous global warming, but chose to lie about it to their shareholders and the public. The suit seeks to help pay for the cost of catastrophic consequences for Rhode Island's communities, like rising sea levels.
We will prove that they negligently failed to warn the state of the damages created by their products, they harmed the environment, and they violated the state's Environmental Rights Act. Enough is enough.
For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Your proud defender of the working class majority, Rick Smith.
Claustrophobia, hypochondria, xenophobia rolled up into one. Just stay in your car, stay in mine, and we won't bother anyone. 'Cause I'm afraid of public transportation. Please don't get too close to me. Please don't get too close to me.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. And for the record, I am not afraid of public transportation. I think it's vital for any city, any community. And you got to wonder, why is it the big ripoff that is coming with the HQ2, the Amazon headquarters #2? One of the things that they're looking for in the city that they, rob blind, is a public transportation system to move their workers around. Why do you think that is? Because they know just how important it is. But here's the thing. We've got an administration now who really off the deep end. I mean, with this latest Supreme Court decision in the Janus case, things are not looking all that great, especially for folks in the public transit world. After you look at what happened in Nashville, the way forward, talking to each other, which is why I have asked John Callahan to come talk with us. He's International Vice President of the Amalgamated Transit Union, our good friends at ATU. John, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, no problem. Glad to do it.
So, I look at what's going on, and, you being from Canada, you've got to be looking down at us going, guys, what's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we hope that stays on your side of the border, but, when bad things happen, it tends to migrate this way, too. So we'll keep our eyes or our fingers crossed that doesn't happen, though.
So are your members aware that, this kind of insanity is going on, and it may, the cancer may infect your part of the world?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we have good communication across the border. We did have a similar challenge back in the 80s, but it was beaten back. It went against our charter here, but there's always new ways that they try to take down the working class. You know that.
Yeah, it's amazing they never run out of bad ideas on how to screw workers.
You got that right.
Because they spend lots of money doing it. And I always go back to what my grandfather said. If a rich guy's going to take a buck out of his pocket to tell you don't need something, you better spend two to get it. Because they understand return on investment. And I look at the kind of money that the Koch brothers here in the U.S. and their ilk have spent at destroying unions and pushing deregulation and buying our political system. And it's paid off for them quite handsomely.
Oh, absolutely. The thing about it is too, it's ideology. I mean, it's not like they need the money, but I mean, it's just they just want to get rid of the working class. That's the bottom line.
Do you think it's I've been saying for a while, I think it's just the aphrodisiac of power, the ability to say that there's no one who can stand up to me, because I've said for a long time unions are that one last defense against fascism, against authoritarianism, against dictatorships, whatever you want to say, because it gives workers through some bit of collective action a powerful voice. Once you strip that away, once you divide people up, slice them, dice them, pit them against one another, you end up with desperation. You end up with, individuals.
Yes, this is, this could be an unfortunate byproduct of this, but we're hoping that it's going to do quite the opposite. We're hoping that it's going to get people fired up. It's going to get them to pull together. And, sometimes we need to get our butt kicked to wake up. And I think this is exactly what's happening here. And I know at the ATU, we spent a lot of time educating our members on this, and we're ready for the fight.
Now, you guys a lot of your members would be covered under this Janus decision, right?
Yeah, all of our public sector employees.
In the U.S.?
In the U.S., yes. Yes. I mean, we've had, a lot of our members in right-to-work states have, they've been dealing with this type of thing for quite a while, and they've been instrumental in helping us with, to train our members in the public sector. And like I said, we're ready for the fight.
Well, that's the hope. I mean, I've been saying that the hope out of this becomes a much more muscular, much more militant movement of people who, I don't know if you know much about the NRA, but I've said that, I would like to see workers hold on to their union cards the way we're led to believe that NRA members hold on to their membership cards.
Yes, wouldn't that be something? But, this, like I say, this might be the wake-up call that we need. We're going to have to get back to old-school unionism, internal organizing. We're going to have to be talking to our members one-on-one, and we're going to have to, only the strong will survive. We're gonna find out who the real leaders are, and it's gonna be a challenge. But I think that we're up to the task.
Well, you better be, because there's not much other hope. Because once and I've said this before, once the unions are broken, there will be no counterbalance to greed, to the capitalist whims. There'll be no answer to this absolute power that they control.
Yes. No, I agree.
So, in looking at this, because, public transportation is, in my view, one of these things that, we should be pushing for in mass, given a bunch of reasons. I mean, population, climate change, effectiveness, all kinds of stuff. And yet it seems that, recently in this country, we've gone even further against the idea politically. I'm curious your thoughts.
Well, I mean, it's the latest thing to exploit. I mean, what we're faced with here in Canada as well as in the U.S. is these global national companies coming out of France and United Kingdom who want to come in here and they want to run our transit systems, and they want to do it for profit. And you can't run a system. You can't provide the public service that's needed and make a profit in doing it. It just doesn't work that way.
But John, that's not American, John. Come on, we're Americans. We profit, greed, good.
Yeah. Well, you see, the thing is, what's happening is the politicians try to insulate themselves from they create the transit authorities. They've tried to put as much layers of insulation between them and their constituents so that they can point the finger and say, no, it's not us, it's them. It's those folks who are running it. And I mean, in most of them, most of these global nationals, they're just here to make a buck. I mean, they're not worried about service. They're worried about running the revenue runs where the most money can be made for them. We've got transportation deserts in the poor areas, because they can't turn a profit there, and they want to run the routes at peak times and get the peak income. Meanwhile, where it's most needed, the low-income folks who typically work, evenings, nights, weekends, that's when most of the service falls off, and that's what hurts us. That's why folks can't get to work. And typically when that happens, unemployment goes up, and so does crime. I mean, if people can't get to work, they're going to do what they need to do to survive, and this is a problem. And this is something that we have to fix. That we have to provide the public service. It's a right. The transportation is a right for folks, and not only for people, getting to work and to school, but also for seniors to give them opportunity to get them out of the house, and we're failing at that.
Yeah, and I'm sad to hear that that's what is happening in Canada too, because
Yes,
it's already happened here. I mean, I grew up, I grew up in a housing project, and we were not on the bus line, so getting to the job centers where it was impossible for people living in that community, because we built these industrial parks where there's no bus service in and out of. So you've cut off a large number of people who didn't have automobiles or reliable transportation from those jobs, and public transportation opens that stuff up. And I've often argued that it's a racial thing. I mean, we've put minorities and poor people in certain areas, and we keep them there. They shouldn't be around the rest of civilized society. Seems to be the mentality.
Yeah, that's what it seems to be, and we have areas like that in Canada as well, where transportation deserts, and low income areas, and it is very problematic. Like I said earlier too, they're concerned with revenue, but they're not looking at the big picture. I mean, they're not looking at how this affects society, how this affects the economy. It's up here in Canada. I'm not sure what the statistic is in the U.S., but in Canada they say every dollar invested in public transportation has a $4 economic spin-off. And I mean that's only the basic spin-off of from the industry, but that's not including getting people to work, like we said earlier, and how does that affect the economy? And if if people are working, you need as much law enforcement, and so I would like to know what the actual value is to it if we weighed it all out, and I'm sure it would probably boggle our mind to know how much of a difference it makes when you invest, and that's the key. A lot of times when we talk about public transportation, we talk about, or we don't talk about, the politicians talk about funding, but they got to stop thinking about it in that respect. They have to think about it as investment, because it's an investment in public transportation.
Right, and it's a lifeline for a number of people. And it's sad for me to hear that even in Canada, the privatization fetish is taking hold, because here in the U.S., I'm not sure how it was in Canada, but originally public transportation was privatized, and they basically ran it into the ground, seeking profit. And then, the public took over and said, it's a common good. We want to make sure that workers have access to it. We can move people around. We can, get rid of some congestion, because I'm a big fan of public transportation, especially if it means, the 100 cars ahead of me, they're off the road, or it takes me off the road. So, I mean, there's a lot of good to this, but I'm sad to hear that the privatization bug has jumped up that way.
Oh, absolutely. In the West Coast, that's my territory in British Columbia. It's a lot of privateers up there. And the thing about it is, too, is it hurts the service because they try to drive down wages. And when you drive down wages, people don't hang around. I mean, they're always looking for better jobs, so you're always in this perpetual training mode, where you're not going to get seasoned operators because they're always going to move on and
chasing nickels.
I mean, and so you don't get that service that's needed, especially in the smaller communities where they kind of, bus operators have always looked out for the community. A driver knows that here comes Mrs. Smith with her 2 kids, and if she's running a bit late, the driver knows to wait for her. But if you've got like I say, this massive turnaround where the drivers don't get an opportunity to get to know their clientele, to get to know their community, and it hurts. It hurts the community. It hurts the industry.
Yeah, it's terrible. And I often say that it's always amazing to me that employers don't seek out unions to represent their workers solely on the turnover part. Because, most unionized companies have very low turnover rates. In fact, I worked for a trucking company, for almost 20 years, and they had a 1% turnover rate yearly. That's how low it was. And that was most of the time were people being fired or let go for one reason or another, not because people voluntarily left. And to me, that's, as an employer, that's something that I would want. I would want that dedicated workforce who is going to be part of the community.
Absolutely. The other part is too, I mean, and the cost of training. I mean, if you're continuously training people coming in the door, you're no further ahead. And you see, with these private companies, they're not on the hook for that. It's the municipalities that are on the hook for it. And again, we've seen it here in my home city of Winnipeg. We back in the early 90s, they privatized the handy transit, the paratransit part of which used to be public, and now the service has just gone into the toilet, and the cost has gone through the roof. So I mean, there's no savings in it. There's only, like I said earlier, it just kind of gives the politicians insulation from it. But now there's talk they want to bring it back in house because the service is so bad. So,
Of course they want to, John, because I've been on the air now 13 years, and one of the first questions I asked, day one, was tell me something that we've privatized. The prisons, the parking authority, the turnpikes, public transportation. Tell me something we've privatized that has actually lived up to the hype, that we were going to get better service for cheaper rates, and it was going to be this new utopia of capitalist dreams. And here, 13 years in, nothing. No one's come and said, Rick, this is something that we've privatized that was so much better. The stories I usually get are, wow, we're paying a lot more for crummier services, but hey, the investors are making out.
Yeah, and that's what it usually boils down to. And and then people just become complacent with poor service, and I think this is the norm. Well, no, it's not. But it gets to the point where there is revolt, and this is a point where we're at right now in our city with our paratransit. So, and I think that I'm hoping that's going to be the trend on both sides of the border here is to to get public transportation back where it needs to be. The other thing too, I mean, we don't have to reinvent the wheel on this. Like, I mean, there's a lot of investment that can be done in public transportation. If it's planned properly, we don't have to break the bank with it either. I mean, you look at over in Europe and Asia, most of the public transportation systems are also that's a city department or municipal department that also runs the real estate, because they understand the partnership between real estate property values and public transportation. Most people want to be close to public transportation,
right?
Because it's for one thing, it's for the convenience. It saves them money. It saves them from owning a car and all the rest of it. So typically, if planned right, you've got to think about where you want your transit way, and you want to own that land. I mean, the city, a municipality wants to own it. They want to plan it so that they can sell some of the land, lease some of the land, but they want to keep it to capture the land value. So as the you get transit-oriented development around a transit way, the property values go up, and they need to capture that value. And if done properly, it can actually pay for itself. And this is the trend that's over in Europe and Asia, and we need to start doing that here in North America, where it's planned out strategically, and so that that the taxpayers aren't always on the hook for these things.
No, that's actually a great idea. Because you're promoting high density living, around these transit sites, and owning the property and renting them out and having that revenue to provide the service seems like a great idea. Let me ask you a last question I've got for you, because someone in the chat room asked about money influence in Canada. Here in the U.S., the money in politics is just corrosive. I mean, it's we've basically got the best democracy money can buy. And folks are curious, in Canada, do you have the same kind of insanity that we have with the kind of money that's in your political system?
Well, we actually had a conversation about this just last week, and you know what? We still, we're not that bad yet, because really here, anyone can grow up and they can be the leader of the country. They can be the prime minister still, because of the way our system works here. If you happen to be good in your community and you get elected as an MP in your community, and your party gets in, and you happen to be the leader of the party, well, you can be the Prime Minister of Canada. So there's still hope here in Canada. You don't, obviously, you need money for your campaign and whatnot, but it's nowhere near where you guys are. So, yeah, the common man can still be the leader in Canada. So I don't think that's the way it is down there anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah, I fear you're correct. But John, I appreciate the time. I enjoyed the conversation. I'd love to talk to you again at some point in the near future. Thanks so much.
Not a problem. I really enjoyed it too. Take care, Rick.
Good stuff. John Callahan, International Vice President with the Amalgamated Transit Union, ATU. If you want to check out their website, atu.org is that site. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Hard times are going around, bringing hard luck on New York town. But I'm banking on the ATU, banking on the ATU. I'm banking on the ATU.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1835. That was the day that textile workers walked off the job at 20 mills in Paterson, New Jersey. But this was not a strike like we might picture one today, with burly men walking the picket line or women chanting as they carry picket signs. In Paterson, most of the strikers were children, ages 10 to 18. Many were young girls. Child labor was in high demand in the silk mills because of their small, nimble fingers. The children walked off the job because they wanted an 11-hour workday and a 6-day work week. They were tired of working 13 grueling hours a day, 7 days a week. Soon, their parents formed the Paterson Association for the Protection of the Working Class to support the strikers. There were no labor unions in Paterson back then. The company refused to negotiate. Women textile workers at other mills in the area also walked off the job. At its peak, 2,000 workers had walked out on strike. Finally, after 6 long weeks, the company agreed to a compromise. They settled on 5 12-hour days and 9 hours on Saturday. The children went back to work to a 69-hour work week. Strike leaders were blacklisted from the mills. This would not be the last time that child laborers took a stand on the job. In 1912, children workers were an important part of the famous Bread and Roses strike of Lawrence, Massachusetts textile workers. In 1933, children workers in Allentown, Pennsylvania sweatshops joined in a strike. Their participation led the governor's wife to join them on the picket line. The strikers there won an increase in wages and reduced hours. Children fought against their exploitation by taking to the picket lines. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my Union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery. For this war is one you're bound to lose. Are you fascists about to lose?
Well, I hope everyone has a happy 4th of July holiday, spends it with their family, enjoys the time celebrating our freedom, celebrating America, celebrating, who we are as a country. And yes, it is a jingoistic holiday that I believe in. And it's one of these things that, and I've said for a long time, you don't cede your patriotism to these radicals on the right wing. We every day get up and we fight for the future of this country and who we want to be as a country. And this idea, and I've had a bunch of, of my liberal friends who were, we don't fight those battles. No. You stand in front of the flag. You say that you believe in freedom and liberty and that you are a patriot fighting for your country. You do not cede that ground to these people because these are not patriots. These are not people who love freedom or democracy or any of that. The people who are running this country right now are none of that. These are radicals. These are extremists. These are authoritarian types who would be happy to shred the Constitution just so they could control more power. So tomorrow, to me, 4th of July is one of those days where you think about the people who founded this country and you think about the courage that it took in the face of overwhelming odds to stand up, step forward, and speak out. And to me, it's one of those days. It's a revered day. Which is why we take off every 4th of July in order to honor the holiday and to, really think about, what kind of a country do we want? So the hope is that on the 4th of July, people will take that moment, reflect on what's happened over this last year and a half. Think about what kind of a country we want to be, what kind of a citizen each one of us want to be. And at what level we're willing to step out into the streets. We're willing to stand up in the lunchroom at work. We're willing to speak out when we see injustice. Speak out when we see tyranny. Speak out when we see, the insanity that's been going on these last several weeks. And to speak out and say, you know what? This is not who we are. This is not America. These are not American values. This isn't the dream that I grew up believing in. This isn't who my parents and grandparents fought wars for us to become. It's that simple. And for each one of us, we have to look ourselves in the eye, in the mirror, and say, which side of history are we going to be on? Will we be on the side that our children thank us for, or will we be on the side where they go, what were you thinking? Hope you have a great holiday. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to find the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for being here. See you Thursday.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk. It's